Hello, Brian from the channel Brian here, reviewing the sophomore movie by actress turned director Olivia Wilde, Don't Worry Darling. I guess after Wilde had a very successful cult hit with Booksmart, she wanted to make a total shift in tone and mood for her next project. Where Don't Worry Darling is supposed to be this high-concept mystery or thriller with some pretty obvious social commentary, even the title being the patronizing dismissal of a woman's anxieties by, presumably, her husband. But then, as time went on, more news started coming out about some pretty bad blood with Wilde at the center of all of it. There was drama, I guess, but it truly came to a head at the premiere of the film. I don't know every detail, but, like, somebody spit on somebody and Harry Styles can't form a sentence about what movies are. Not that beef between actors and directors is new or anything, but it always sucks when that happens, because you'd hope at least a half dozen people who can wipe their asses with money could find a way to get along. But mostly, I feel bad for me, because I had to hear about it. And it's doubly sad that the behind-the-scenes drama was far and away more interesting than anything in the film. The biggest issue with Don't Worry Darling is how way ahead of the curve and cutting edge Wilde convinced herself she's being, when really the idea of a seemingly perfect society that hides a dark secret is as well-born a cliche can be. Even within a subcategory of using this trope for gendered commentary, this has been a thing since the 1970s adaptation of The Stepford Wives. I guess it's been slightly modernized, but the degree which Wilde seems to think she's doing something fresh and new here is so disproportionate to how little she's actually brought to the formula. She plays a character in the film, and her performance just oozes the mindset of someone who thinks what they've written is so completely clever. It's giving M. Night in Lady in the Water. In a thriller like this, you're expecting a buildup of events which indicate something is wrong with this utopic community the characters are all living in, but with that comes, like, the understanding those things need some kind of purpose. They should probably be related to what's wrong. There's plenty of foreshadowing in Don't Worry Darling. Lord is there. But so little of it is very concerned with anything but over-enunciating an obvious, ominous tone. So much of this movie is there just to be weird or quirky in a vacuum. Most of the imagery amounts to nothing. And despite Don't Worry Darling revolving entirely around its twist, most of what's meant to be scary doesn't even foreshadow it very well, nor is explained by it. There are largely dialogue-driven elements to the film which illustrate the film's messages, but they're lacking nuance and kind of dumbed down. To such a degree, there are scenes genuinely out of a Neil Breen movie. I mean, literally. Scenes of supporting characters saying, "I am so glad I get to take care of and service my husband who provides for me," while sitting in, like, some kind of mall with live demonstrations of every product. Because women be shopping, right, Olivia Wilde? What's left is the trappings of a woke psychological thriller, as disassembled as the genre can get. But another of the film's biggest issues is Wilde's complete inability to create tension. The performances, for one thing, really detract from the story's believability. I've already mentioned how delusional Wilde's performance is, but everybody else is, like, on the exact opposite energy. They all look confused. It's hard to act out a script where the writer-director sees the genius of her work, and you clearly don't, but don't want to say anything. Even Florence Pugh, who does the best job, is betrayed by the material giving her so little to work with. I know there could be an argument pulled out of somebody's ass this lack of believability is intentional, but one, the result of the bad acting is an audience not taking the characters as seriously when the film is clearly asking them to. Two, even if a character's behavior is unusual or part of some grander subterfuge, that itself shouldn't have any bearing on how well the character is performed. And of course, third, when you have one actress whose performance does not follow this trend because she wrote the film, isn't she, like, a control group for what everyone's performance should be like if they understood the material? Then you have Mr. Harold Styles, who just seems out of place. Bad, to be sure, but as he was so transparently cast just because of his relationship with Wilde, this is an example of that on-set drama bleeding into the final product. His role was originally played by Shia LaBeouf, who is a better casting choice for this part, even though I'm not the biggest fan of putting LaBeouf in things anymore. It's just when you see where the script is going with this character, trying to put Harry into that character's shoes is just silly. Without spoiling it, let's leave it at that. The role requires a duality he doesn't have. His line reading is bad enough for the entire part to be a lost cause. You need not go into any further detail, but keep in mind, I could. Even on paper, these characters don't all work. I never get any impression of who these people are. Sometimes they'll claim somebody else in the movie is their friend, even though until that point you'd never guess they had ever spoken to one another before. I can't think of a single insight as to who any of these people are, besides their little predetermined role in the commentary. It's impossible to see them as anything but the storytelling pawns they are. And now that I bring that up, we've come full circle to the very first and biggest issue with the film. The commentary is insubstantial and misguided at best, but has insane conviction it isn't. Even with any additions or strange little pivots into science fiction Wilde made to the commentary, the fundamental principles are the same as they've always been. A toxic, rigid patriarchy silences women, insists on their submission, and treats their issues with disbelief. And men will defend their role as leader and provider by any means necessary. My criticism is obviously not a dismissal of these things being relevant themes or worthy topics for a movie. I very much do enjoy and appreciate a movie about these things, but more like I think this movie truly has nothing to say about them, except for merely the fact that these things do in fact happen. Like, you're not the next Susan B. Anthony for suggesting the patriarchy is a construct and has to do with control in 2022. The music, the score, is yet another dog whistle for how insufferably self-serious this movie is. Plinkety-plonkety horror violins like AI generated the Hereditary trailer. Then sometimes it'll slam down some droning bass like the Invisible Man, further adding to the mishmash of cliches on display here. It all comes from a place which is more about a cursory acknowledgement and pity for what women go through under patriarchy rather than having anything to say about the topic. Men had this problem a few months ago. Last Night in Soho was the exact same thing. We're in such a horrible wave of pseudo-feminist filmmaking that claims to understand so much yet says so little. At least we have Olivia Wilde coming in with this movie to say, hey, women filmmakers can be a part of that wave too. To help exemplify the lack of thought I'm referring to, Olivia Wilde has made a point routinely in interviews about how the sex scenes in this film were written to emphasize the man pleasing the woman. You know, because that's a rarity for most movies. See, in isolation, I understand the reason a director would do that, but then the way it's been included in the movie is undermined when the character servicing Myuu has, at his core, stripped her of all autonomy, and therefore her consent. Her partner's concern for her pleasure and concern for her consent are at a total mismatch. One would think a version of sex that appeals to a female gaze should include both. Or am I wrong and the female gaze begins and ends with having sex with Harry Styles? Maybe it's just that way for Olivia. And including some big, supposedly psychological twist near the end doesn't actually make the messages you're going for any more substantive. I mean, you got your twist, your little gotcha moment, even if it raises more questions than it answers and creates contradictions all over the film. I don't think the direction is that strong. Wilde gave the okay to multiple shots where something that is clearly supposed to be in focus is not in focus. She clearly did not get the performances she wanted out of these actors, and in the end, for an intended psychological thriller with deep social messages, you will so quickly understand everything it has to offer. A story and commentary so tacky this whole movie could have been the first 40 minutes of a shitty YA movie if you aged the characters down 10 years. Don't Worry Darling is exactly what it looks like an out-of-touch, deranged Hollywood actress saw Get Out and said, I can do that. Strong 3. So hey, did you like this movie more than me? Less than me? Well, if you care to, please tell me. And as always, if you like not only words, but the way I arrange and then say them, please consider giving this video a like and subscribing to me, Brian from the channel Brian. It'll help me with the algorithm. Thank you, and goodbye.